The book of Exodus was written by Moses sometime between 1440 and 1400 BC. The story follows Israel's time in Egypt and their journey to the Promised Land. Exodus picks up 400 years after Genesis, where Abraham's family has grown into a people now called Israel, living as slaves in Egypt under Pharaoh. In the midst of a decree to wipe out the Jewish people altogether, we're introduced to Moses. God appoints him as leader of the Israelites, the one to lead them out of bondage. God sends a series of 10 plagues over Egypt as divine justice against Pharaoh, and even after allowing the Israelites to leave, Pharaoh sends an army to capture the Israelites. God miraculously parts the sea for Israel, delivering his people. From here, the Israelites begin to wander in the wilderness. They quickly forget their deliverance from their oppressors and complain against God, yet God responds with mercy and provision. The people encamp at the foot of Mount Sinai, where God invites Israel into a new covenant with him to establish a standard of living for the people. Through obeying these laws, Israel will become a nation set apart to represent God to the world as promised to Abraham. God extends this incredible access to himself, but Israel ignores God, choosing their own path. In Exodus, we see God's miraculous efforts to free the Israelites from hunger, slavery, their own wandering, and ultimate genocide. However, God is faithful to his promises, even when Israel rebels again and again.
We've had the privilege throughout our life to be involved in several different mission endeavors and literally have been able to go around the world and work and serve and play even. And we've gotten to see and experience a lot of really cool cultures and be a part of watching the church, how the kingdom expands and how the church is involved, how we become the hands and the feet. And we get to work together with brothers and sisters around the world. And when my children were little and Ashley and I had been here for our first probably about 12 years, we were able to do a sabbatical, and we went to Nassau, Bahamas to serve as volunteer missionaries for a few months. Now, I know that sounds like, man, I'd like to serve as a volunteer missionary, but we did, and you missed out. It was fun. But we got to go and be a part of this, and what we did is we served in a capacity where teams would come in every week, and they'd come in on Saturday and they'd leave on Saturday, and all summer long, we were the ones that helped facilitate their mission trip. So we worked really hard from Saturday getting the teams in, and it would be from 400 to 500 people would come in. We would get them from the airport to where they were staying, and we would have them work all week. And part of the ritual was, and what we did in our rhythm that during that time, was on Friday, we got the day off. And on Friday, we would go out with all of the teams to different places to play. And some Fridays, you would just go to the beach, and some Fridays, you would just go and maybe play at some little different islands or whatever. But one of our favorite places was a place you went to snorkel, and it was called Stewart's Cove. And Stewart's Cove was unbelievable. Through our summer, I got to go there about 5 or 6 times and be a part of the dives. And the snorkel, if you're not familiar, it's the spout would put in your mouth, your fins. You don't have air tanks on like scuba diving, but what would happen is you'd get to go out. And in the Caribbean, the water is unbelievably clear. And so they would take you to these different spots for what they call a dive, and it's just you're on the surface, but you could free dive if you'd like. And we got to go and be a part of these dives and get to go to these different places. And one location was just this clear, almost like a bowl that you would get out into, and it was about 70 feet deep, and you could see all kinds of marine life and shells and fish and different animals, and unbelievable, just phenomenal. And then they would take you to another where it was a plane wreck, and it was a DC-10 that was on the bottom of the ocean floor, and they would see who could go down and get close to it and yet experience all of this. The way they wrapped up every tour, that half-day tour on Stewart's Cove, is you would come to what they called the shark dive. Now, I got to be honest, that was unbelievably scary. The shark dive, because, sharks have teeth, and they're big. And as Eric Wood would say, they were scavenger sharks, but I'm not sure anybody ever told them that the Caribbean reef shark was just a scavenger shark because, well, they were 8 to 10 feet long, and they were big, and they were agile, and did I say they had teeth, and they were big? But what would happen is they would take the boats and would get out into the depth of water, and they would, any other time in these dives, they'd let us just go out and swim wherever we wanted. And then they'd take the roll call once you got back in the boat. But on the shark dive, what would happen is they would get in the area, they'd drop anchor, they would let you sit out there, but then they would put a line in the water that would float on the surface, and as the divers, you would have to get in the water and hold on to the line. You were not allowed to just kind of freelance. You weren't allowed to go and explore. You had to hold on to that line, and you would want to stay flat on the surface with your face mask in the water, spout out, and watch. And then they would drop a chum bucket down into the water at about 25 or 30 feet, and sharks from all over would begin to arrive to see the chum in the chum bucket. And they would begin to hit the bucket. And the more they hit the bucket, the more chum would be released into the water. The more chum that was released into the water, the more sharks would arrive. And so right below you, you could witness unbelievable 25, 30, 40, 50 sharks. What seemed like 17 million sharks would start coming all around you, and you would be face down watching it and witnessing this. Now, here's what I know for sure, that sharks do not have a sense of smell, because there's no way. They did not smell urine in the water at all. There's no way. It was so scary, your heart would beat fast, and I could feel that you would tense up, and it was one of those things that really kind of caught your breath. And then as everybody would get out of the water, when they begin to tell you, okay, it's unsafe now, everybody back in the boat, you would get in the boat, and everybody would tell the same thing. They'd start talking about, did you see this one? Did you see that shark? Did you see the size of that shark? The risk involved in getting in the water probably was pretty minimal because, like Eric says, they were scavenger sharks. However, the perceived risk was high because we were swimming with sharks. And in that water, there was no safety, there was no cage, there was no spear gun. You were just in the water. What I want you to do right now is grab people in your home or get online and talk to your host pastor or your campus pastor and maybe just share this. What has been the biggest risk that you have taken in your life? Go ahead and chat about that now. See, when we think about risk, what risk really evolves down to, what boils down to, is what it could result in is a loss or failure. Now, a lot of people, they talk about high risk equals high reward. And we also talk about that low reward is low risk. But we know that taking risk is really, really scary. It's hard. It's hard to jump in the water when you see sharks. Sarah Eckel says this, that most people are not good at evaluating risk. She goes on to say that the danger that most of us seem to fear the most is the feeling that we cannot control the outcome. So risk, it can be evaluated and equal to our control in the outcome. That when we can't control the outcome, when we don't have a say in how this thing plays out, then we tend to shy away. What we do know, though, is in Scripture there are a ton of stories of people who took big risk for their faith. I mean, there's the story of Esther in the Old Testament that when she went to save all of Israel and she confronts the king in Esther 4:14 and just says, I will go to the king, and even though it's against the law, and if I perish, I perish. She understood the risk that were involved. The story that maybe you learned as a child in the VBS was about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in Daniel 3:16 when Nebuchadnezzar said, you got to bow down and worship me. And they said, we're not going to do it. And he throws them into the fiery furnace. Maybe you've heard the story about the little children's song. It talks about Zacchaeus and how he was a wee little man. And he climbs the tree in Luke 19 and he goes out on a limb, literally, to see Jesus and talk to him. Or maybe you've heard the story in Matthew chapter 14 when Jesus is walking on water and he calls one of the disciples, Peter, out of the boat and onto the water with him. And Peter boldly gets up, but he begins to sink. See, there are countless risky stories all through Scripture where men and women have said, I am going to step out of the boat. I'm going to take a risk beyond anything I've ever done. So what I want you to do now is just maybe in the same group at home or at work or on the chat line with the host pastor, what is the biggest risk you've ever taken for your faith? Maybe it's a story you've shared. It's a neighbor you've invited. Maybe it's you have forgotten everything and just rolled out into another country to share your story. So take a moment now and talk about the biggest risk you've taken for your faith. See, as we continue in this series, these new rhythms that we're in because of the time we're in, We're going to continue this story of the Israelites and kind of bring it to a conclusion today that the Israelites were given this dream of a preferred future. That even when they were slaves, all the way back in Egypt, that Moses, through God through Moses, was sharing that there was a preferred future, that there was a promised land, a land flowing of milk and honey. And when you see that and you hear that in the Old Testament, this land flowing in milk and honey, it was talking about it was a land that was abundant. It had prosperity. It was flourishing. It was everything that you would want, that it was flowing with milk and honey. It was ready to go, ready to be taken. And the reality for the Israelites was they had to transition from living as slaves to living as free to going to the preferred future of where they felt God wanted them to be. And it was also not just where he wanted them to be, it's what he designed for them. So they went through this life as a slave. They went through the life as in the desert, in the wilderness. And now God has moved them. And in the last few weeks, we've talked about these times where they kind of cried out and they had to go through the sadness and the grief of being hungry and being thirsty. And the God has provided every step of the way. And so here we are today at the right place and the right time in history. And Moses has prepared the people. And now it is time to take the land. It is time to go into the promised land. And so Moses is putting together a team. And sometimes you see it as spies, and maybe a better word to use is a scout, that God tells Moses, hey, get together 12 men, one from each of the tribes of Israel, and send them in to check out the land. Explore it. Bring out its fruit, that you will verify, that these people will verify what I've told you, that this land is flowing with milk and honey, that the fruit is everywhere, it is ready for you to take. And so these 12 are going to go out and they're going to explore this land. And they did, and they went, and they saw all of it. They witnessed everything that God had said. They witnessed the natural resources, but they also saw the people that inhabited the land. And Moses told them to bring back the fruit. Bring some back. And it says in verse 23 of Numbers 14 or 13, it says that they brought back a single cluster of grapes. Now, I got to believe that if I'm there seeing all of this, I'm bringing back as much as I can carry. And they brought back a single cluster of grapes. They brought back a few pomegranates and figs. But they agreed as a land flowing of these resources, milk and honey. They spent 40 days scouting out the land. And in Numbers 13, here's their report, verse 26. They came back to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community at Kadesh in the desert of Paran. There they reported to them and to the whole assembly and showed them the fruit of the land. They gave Moses this account. We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey, and here is its fruit. But the people who live there are powerful. Their cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there, and Amalekites live in Negev, and the Hittites and Jebusites and Amorites live in the hill country, and the Canaanites live near the sea and along the Jordan. Now, every statement God has told them, every statement he has told them about the promised land that he has shared through Moses has come true. It is awesome. The land is unreal. It is flowing with fruit and honey. It's flourishing. We can prosper there. And if you'll remember, not that long ago, these are the same people that said, you brought us out here to starve to death. You brought us out here. If we just went back to Egypt, at least we had meat in our pots. We're so hungry. We got nothing out here in the desert. And here they are on the cusp of taking the land that God wants them to have. And they said, it is everything you said it was going to be. They have this opportunity to receive the great home that has been promised to them. But someone spots a shark. Someone spots a shark and doesn't want to get in the water. Even though the greatest stories in Scriptures always involve some type of shark. And if we think about it in our lives, we've all come to these great challenges in our personal lives. And we face them the same way, that every call of God will be faced with challenges. Every call of God will be faced with some type of challenge. I mean, I don't know if what caused Moses to be more stunned. I mean, He sent 12 of the good guys, solid leaders. And fear is preventing the belief. I mean, Moses had to be stunned. His mind had to be racing. I'm sure it blitzed through everything that had transpired, that from the burning bush they called him, to the plagues that he has witnessed with Pharaoh, all the way to the parting of the Red Sea, and then the Red Sea crashing in on Pharaoh's army, to being led by a cloud during the day and a pillar of fire at night. That when they were thirsty, water was provided. When they were hungry, manna and quail were there. And finally, they are there for their desired future, the place they are supposed to go, the promised land. And the guys are saying, but there's giants over there. They're big. The cities are fortified. I don't know that we can take it. And finally, a voice kind of cries out into the group. Numbers chapter 13, verse 30 says, then Caleb silenced the people before Moses. He said, we should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it. But the men who had gone up with him said, we can't attack those people. We can't attack them. They're stronger than we are. And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land that they had explored. They said, the land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there were a great size. We saw the Nephilim there, the descendants of Anak from Nephilim, and we seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. See, that Caleb was trusting in the risk that God was asking of him. And Caleb believed in the risk that God was asking. I wonder if the response from the other scouts was more like mine. The people over there, they were bigger, they were stronger. They made us feel bad about ourselves. They looked at us funny. The land isn't safe. There's too many sharks in the water. It doesn't matter to me what God has asked or promised. There's just too much, too big, too overwhelming. See, I wonder sometimes if we get caught that our fear of our current reality is greater than my awe into the divine. That I get caught in my fear of what a reality really is, that I lose sight of the greatness and the awe of the divine. And God is calling them out. In Numbers 14, verse 1, it says this, that night all the members of the community raised their voices and they wept aloud. All the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole assembly said to them, if only we had died in Egypt, or at least or in the wilderness. Why is this Lord bringing us into the land only to let us fall by the sword, our wives and children be taken as plunder? Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? And they began to say to each other, we should choose a leader and go back to Egypt. So here we go again, this same cry. We just should have died in Egypt. We should have just died in the wilderness. It's pretty whiny. We should not have trusted and followed God out here. We should have never, ever trusted him. He brought us out here to die by the sword. In other words, just to be slaughtered, to die out here, and then our wives and our children will be taken as slaves. Their desired future was so close. It was right there. All they had to do was say, let's go. All they had to do was to take the land, but they didn't. Their desired future was so close, yet the prevailing wisdom was, the prevailing thought was, let's just go back to Egypt. Let's just go back to Egypt. Let's be slaves again. And so the story continues that Joshua and Caleb comes before the people. They were 2 of the 12 of the scouts or the spies that go into the land. And Joshua and Caleb plead with the people, we can do this. God will fight on our behalf. We can take the land. Don't be afraid. But the people would have none of it. They wanted to stone Moses and Aaron and Joshua and Caleb. Their fear was so great. Even though they had witnessed so much, it didn't matter. The sharks were just too numerous in the water. See, our natural response when you and I are faced with stress, when we are faced in these type of situations, we got 3 natural responses. We fight. We pick up our swords and we want to go to war. We flight. We just take off. We flee. We're out. The other one is freeze. we just freeze in fear and we're not able to move. Israel is making a decision today about the promised land, and it is we are going to leave. But God makes a promise to all of Israel that day as he stands there, and he has led them every step of the way, and here they are. And he tells them, you will not see the promised land. You got to head back. You got to head back to the wilderness and spend some time there. The first generation of the men and women who you are the ones that have made this decision, you are the ones that cast the votes that you do not want to attack, you want to go back to Egypt, you're not ever going to see it. You will die in the wilderness. You're going to spend 1 year for every day the scouts or the spies spend in the land. So 40 years will now be it. Joshua and Caleb, you're the only two that said we could do this. You get to go in at some point. You're the only two that believed. The other 10 of the scouts, they dropped dead of a plague that the Lord had given them because of their disbelief and the way they had tricked the rest of the Israelites into not going. As the people watched this, they cried out. They couldn't believe what was taking place as they heard the voice of God, and they saw the 10 that had led them astray. They dropped in. They said, hey, we've sinned. Let's go take it now. And they pick up their swords and their spears, and they head up to the high country, and they're going to go to war. And they tell them not to because they're pushed back. They did everything they could to try to do it on their own. So here they are wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. There's several chapters of story in there, but if you fast forward these 40 years, the 10 spies are gone. The first generation have all passed away. Moses has passed away. Joshua has now been ordained to lead the Israelites into the promised land. He is the new leader of Israel. God is honoring his word from the very beginning, all the way back to Abraham, to the slave time in Egypt, to the time with Moses, through the wandering in the wilderness, to now. God is honoring his word, and it is time to take the land. Joshua chapter 14, verse 10 says this, now then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive for 45 years since the time he said this to Moses, while Israel moved about in the wilderness. And this is Caleb. So here I am today, 85 years old. I'm still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm just as vigorous to go out into battle now as I was then. Now give me this hill country that the Lord promised me that day. You yourself heard then that the Anakites were there and their cities were large and fortified, but the Lord helping me, I will drive them out just as he said. Caleb goes before Joshua and he says, hey, now that you're in charge and our 40 years is up, that God has made a promise. God has made a promise to me that this is my land. God has made a promise to me, this is where we can go. And at 85 years of age, he says, today's the day. Today's the day. I want to take my land. See, it was not God's will for Israel to wander in the wilderness. It wasn't God's will for them to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. He had a desired future for them. He had a desired plan for their lives, a plan to inherit a land of milk and honey. Now, this isn't about prosperity preaching or that all dogs go to heaven. But there was a desired plan for the people. All they had to do was go into the land. They chose not to. The amount of sharks in the water was just too much. The sharks in the water were too much. See, today as we talk about these new rhythms and rituals in our life, that we are at a point in time for you and I, as we step into this new reality, we get to choose who we want to live like. I want to live like Caleb. I want to be the type of leader, I want to be the type of person, the type of man who says, I want to honor God with my life. I want to honor God with these decisions. And that when his promises come, that I hold fast to them. I hold true to them. And I say, it's time. I want to take the land. I don't want to spend time in a wilderness wandering around because we didn't take any risk. See, I wonder today, as sometimes it's easy to grieve and lament over the pandemic. It's easy to grieve and lament over the time and how things have changed and how things are different. And I get that. I'm not, again, not shortchanging that. But I also think there's unbelievable opportunity for us. I think there's unbelievable opportunity for us as believers. And I wonder what God is asking of us. What is God asking of you? Are there things in your life that God is teeing you up for? That there is a preferred future for you. There is a land of milk and honey. There are challenges ahead of you. And so you and I have to make this decision. Will we take the land? Will we go after the land? Will we just step foot in the land and we let God be God and fight the battles for us? Or will we live a life of fear? Will we say things like, hey, I just shouldn't have followed you. There are just too many sharks in the water. The risk is too great. That my fear of not being able to control the outcome is greater. It's greater than my fear of letting you take charge of my life. And I pause. I freeze. I flee. So today, I want you to leave with this challenge as we've come together. And it is in this challenge that we decide that we have been delivered and that there is a promised land for you and there's a promised land for me, and we can take it. Not on our own of good. We can't do it on our own, but we can do it because it is the Lord's plan. It is His land He's giving to us. Now I want to pray with us today as we conclude this series and as we come out to sing this song that we're going to talk about and sing this song, Egypt, that it is a powerful song that we talk about the deliverance, but then we celebrate what God is doing in our lives. Father God, thank you so much for the day you've given us, our opportunity we have to worship you, to celebrate you. And Father, I pray you give us the courage and new rhythms and new rituals. You give us the courage to live the life that you want us to live. That no matter the risk, no matter how many sharks are in the water, we'll jump in. And we will be the men and women you've called us to be. And we've asked all these things in your precious and holy name. Amen.